I've been a Citroen enthusiast since my long lost youth at art college. The first time I saw a Citroen was a Citroen ID19, and at that time I said, I'm going to have one of those one day, and I did eventually. Since then I've owned loads of Citroens, so for me to choose a vintage Citroen wasn't a hard choice. It was as a result of my brother and my eldest son sort of saying, you need a hobby, Dad. Because like most men, when you sort of come to retirement age, you haven't got a hobby because you're too busy working. And so I listened to them, looked at various models, and I'm looking at my brother's car and other classic cars. I felt they was too modern for my taste, and I wanted something to stand out from the crowd, so to speak. And my eldest son, he kindly emailed me this on eBay, and I like the looks of it. And at the same time, there's one actually for sale up in Scotland, and so I looked at this one first, it was closest, which was down at Poole in Dorset. Had a good look at it. My brother Barry came with me, a discussion ensued on price. I came away. Several phone calls later, we agreed, the price went down, and picked it up with my brother Barry. That's how I come to own it. Driving the 5CV, first of all, was a little bit hairy. A, because you're used to modern car suspension systems, and B, you're used to good braking. With only one brake on this car on the transmission, you've got to recognise your distances as per highway code, and possibly beyond that, you're more aware of driving and what's going on about you. Also, suspension, although it's got 4 elliptical plates front and rear, it's rigid. If you hit a bump, you feel it, you tend to sort of slide, I won't say broadside, but you tend to slide round corners rather than glide round them. Steering's heavy until you really get moving. First gear really truly just a take-off gear to unstick the tyres off the road and get it moving. Well, the steering is very, very stiff because there's no power assisted steering, and obviously before you get a move on, you're having to sort of really wrench it on. And I really don't understand the term the European car for ladies of the day when it was launched, because a lady would have to have biceps like a weightlifter to turn the steering until they really get moving. Other than that, it's fine. The gearbox is a crash gearbox, 3-speed, 1 reverse, 3 forwards, and again you have to have the knack of gear changing because it's a crash gearbox, because you get used to double declutching. I'm not very good at it, but due to the gearing of the car being relatively low, just by dropping your revs, it is comparatively easy to get into gear without crunching your box too much. Now and again I get it wrong. And she's a little bit noisy, but I think in essence it does hone your driving skills and it makes you a better driver while you're driving it. And it's certainly noticeable when I get back into my normal car, I'm a careful, slow, considerate driver for at least 2 hours. Unbeknownst to me, when I put after falling over the car and saying to my brother, I've got to have it, so I bought it. I didn't know anything about the history of the car. I then decided to join the 5CV Club of Europe, which is based in Switzerland, and I also went and saw a guy who's possibly the UK expert on the 5CV series of cars, a chap called Bozzy Mocek, and he actually has written an article on Citroen itself, Mr. Andre Citroen himself and the car. And when I went and saw him, and took photographs of the car with me, and he looked at my car, and unusually it's got 2 registration plates under the bonnet, which we'll show you later. And he immediately emailed my photograph of the registration plate to the guy in Switzerland, who emailed back and said, this is unusual, I will come back to you. Well, lo and behold, about 3 weeks later, I had a wodge of email, about 4 pages long, giving a description of his investigation, and it appears that in the 20s, Spanish, like most governments, didn't dictate what side of the road you could drive on or even what sort of type of car you could have, but they did insist on your car having its own Spanish registration plate, which is meant on the bulkhead next to the manufacturers, and then it gives the name of the driver, its registration area, which was Madrid in Spain, and where he drove it. And that was Mallorca. And his name was Joao Carrió, and as I understand it, Vech was the mother's surname, which is quite typical of the Spanish people, even to this day, and Carrió was the name of the village. And that was something traced to being a Spanish minister who was in the Spanish government and was in some way involved or responsible for the independence of Cuba. So it's got a little bit of historical heritage attached to it. It is slightly subjective because it could never be totally proven. I did write to the Spanish Ministry of Transport in Madrid a couple of times, not to receive an answer. I wrote to the Spanish Embassy in London, again I didn't receive an answer. So I'm satisfied with the research the guy did for me free of charge, which was a bonus, but also because of the nature of the times in those days, people could afford a car like this, it's got to be 85-90% correct what he found out anyway. Because you don't get many Joao Carriós in the 20s driving the Citroen in Mallorca. It's also recognised by children as a cartoon character. Brum is the name of the children's cartoon. And after I've been told it a few times, I then went on the web and watched the whole episode, and I was totally amused by the episode in the car, which has got a mind of its own, which is a little bit like the real version. And that was loosely modelled on the Citroen 5CV. My most favourite part of the car. That's very hard when the car is favourite for what it is anyway. But if one had to pinpoint one aspect, I think it's single door with a spare wheel on the side, which was typical of the whole 5CV series. Even the 5CV vans of the day, they had the single wheel on the driver's side, and you always had to get out on the passenger side. My favourite line from The Reason Why One Door was, it was marketed as the latest car for Europe, as I mentioned earlier, and it was the lady being the driver then gave the man the option of opening the door for it to get in, and he could open it for it to get out as well. I have to say, it's a delight owning it, apart from the mechanical problems I had in the early days with it, because it's a head turner, it makes people smile, it makes them laugh, and it makes me laugh every time I drive it, because it is quirky, like most Citroens are, or the early Citroens are, should I say. So I'm not going to say much more than that, but I think every car owner that owns classics or vintage, you've got to be excited to watch your own, otherwise it's just another vehicle.